Hello, Galaxy. I'm Chris Pirillo, and many of you use iPads. I used to use an iPad. I still kind of use an iPad. I had an iPad Pro, still have it, really, not in my direct possession. It's here. I let my daughter use it as her primary computer because it's easy enough to manage and it's simple enough for her to use, and I really don't have to worry about it. It's just there and it's good. I was using it, not just for work stuff, but also during my live stream. I would open up an NDI application and broadcast, the camera pointed down at my 3D printer to have another element there on Twitch. So I was using the iPad, maybe not like other people might, but it still worked, and it worked well enough. And then iOS came out with an update last year, and it kind of made the software keyboard go funky, and it changed how it looked. And I was using the keyboard stand pad protector contraption thing that you have on the iPad that gives it a keyboard and everything. It was nice. It was built really well, but the software update just made the software kind of like challenging to use because the software keyboard kept popping up, and I'm like, I can't wait for this to get fixed. This is not helping. I already have the keyboard here, but because iPad OS was not really built with keyboards in mind. You can use keyboards, yes, and the keyboards exist, and the keyboards are certainly compatible. But the operating system itself just didn't have that in mind outright. Then again, a lot of mobile operating systems didn't. So I'm not necessarily saying that was the straw that broke the camel's back. But I was using an iPad for the longest time, and was happy enough with it, but still frustrated with the limitations that I ran into with iPad OS that many power iPad OS users complain about. So I'm definitely not the only one. So I was frustrated. I felt pain. I needed to find something else, but I didn't really think there was an alternative to the iPad. Because quite honestly, the last experience I had with an Android tablet was eons ago. I think it was like the Nexus 7, maybe? And I've used Chrome OS over the years, and I knew that I couldn't use Chrome OS in my specific use case. I needed to find some kind of viable Android tablet. So I searched online, best Android tablet, did exactly what y'all would do, and Samsung was recommended. I'm like, Samsung, really? I hadn't had a lot of experience with the Samsung. I'm like, all right, well, let's see how this works. I've been using an iPad for as long as I have. I'm aware of its strengths and drawbacks. I'm going to try the Samsung Galaxy Tab S7 Plus. It was the S7 range. Even though I didn't have everything that I might have wanted, it had one thing that I absolutely needed, and that was specifically a high refresh rate screen. So 120 frames per second, smooth. So I walked into an electronics store, looked at it, did one swipe, and I'm like, dude, this is more responsive than my iPad. And I was like, okay, well, I moved stuff around like, dude, this is like, I'm whipping in and out, animations, smooth, slick, no dropped frames. I'm like, oh man, this is like, how did I not know about it? I'm like, it's kind of Samsung. I'm like, well, how can I de-Samsungify it? All right, well, I know about Good Lock. I'll use that, and let's see about, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, what's this DeX mode? What's DeX? What is Samsung DeX? I didn't know much about it. Hadn't done any research, had no experience with it. Open up Samsung DeX, and I'm like, oh my God, Samsung DeX is exactly what iPad users want. This is what they want iPad to be. I'm telling you right now, if you have not looked at, I'm getting excited, you can hear it in my voice. If you've not yet looked at a Samsung tablet running Samsung DeX, so like one of their newer tabs, you're missing out big time. And I mean, apart from like, oh, I need to live in Apple's ecosystem. Okay, if you don't need to, you're just looking for a good tablet that's responsive, but it works more like a traditional operating system might on the desktop, like a Mac OS or Windows OS, or to a certain degree, Chrome OS, to a certain degree. Samsung DeX has been, as far as I'm concerned, the killer feature. And even with a lack of optimization across the board, last year, it still worked well, and it did darn near everything I needed to do, and quite honestly, gave me less problems than the iPad did with the software that I had to run, that I needed to run. Again, same software, same vendor software, third-party software on either platform. What I found was that the software looked better, and that's subjective, admittedly, but ran better, certainly, and I was able to operate it the way that I was wanting to operate it, like moving the windows around, because in this scenario, I needed to find a tablet. It had to be iPad OS, or it had to be an Android tablet, one of the two. I could not use a Mac in this scenario, and I could not use a Windows machine in this scenario. So what I'm saying is, even with, you know, Stage Manager, we're on the cusp of Stage Manager being released, and I think that will go a long way, a very long way with Windows management, should Apple be able to iron out all the kinks. Still kind of in beta, but there's been a lot of feedback and hopefully a lot of attention paid to it, because it's pretty much their tentpole feature for this iteration of iPad OS that's yet to be released. That said, I can only tell you, running apps on Mac OS, like iPhone apps and iPad apps, they're not, like, great idea, questionable implementation. Like, Android apps run better on Chrome OS, and Android apps run better on Windows than iPad or iOS apps run on Mac OS. And I'm just telling you, generally, there's a lot of quirks and usability issues. It's a feature that was never really fully baked, because Mac OS, of course, was not optimized for touch, and the mobile device was not necessarily optimized for a desktop environment. Maybe one day they'll straighten that out. I don't know if Stage Manager will fix that problem. I really don't know, because there could be window resizing issues. Maybe the windows want to be resized. Maybe they don't want to be resized. Maybe they can't be resized. So that's, again, a limitation that Apple may or may not address. That may be an issue or a limitation that third-party developers may or may not address. What I'm telling you is, out of the box, Android and Android apps in Samsung DeX work more like a desktop equivalent. And I'm going to show you here. Now, this is going to be a little awkward, because I'm going to hold it up. I know, high production value here, shooting this stuff live. I'm running in Samsung DeX, but what I've got, and you'll have to pardon if my finger's touching the bottom of the screen, that's going to make it somewhat difficult. I got my NDI app here. Let me go ahead and minimize that. Sorry. It's a little difficult to do at this angle. Okay, am I touching the screen? There we go. I'm touching the screen down here. The bezels are too small. But the other apps here, like Google Photos, I'm able to browse side by side. I'm able to move it around. I'm able to increase or decrease transparency to the window. I can pin it to the top. I can maximize it full screen, and then it turns into the tablet app, right? And it's very, very slick, very fast, very responsive. And more importantly, I can move these windows around. I can drag and resize, and watch what happens to my calculator. It goes to the ticker tape on the side, right? Or I can resize it again. It's a little easier to do when I'm actually using it rather than just trying to demonstrate it. I just figured this would be the easiest way. But this is the way I feel iPad users have been wanting to use their iPad from the beginning. This is what they've been clamoring for. And what I'm telling you is, this exists. This is the tip of the iceberg of DeX. Sorry about tapping the mic. I can go into the task switching view and get, an overview of what's going on. I can, minimize to the desktop. I've got the back button back here, so I can close out of apps or go backwards. I can open up all the apps, kind of like, the start menu or whatever. I can use keyboard shortcuts as well, though I'm not really thrilled with Samsung's rather flimsy keyboard attachment. I wished it was a better stand, kind of like the iPad stand. Suffice it to say, though, I've had a better experience with using this add-on with Samsung DeX than I did with the iPad keyboard on iPad OS. There have been quirks, certainly, but what I wanted to point out was specifically this is that not what you want on iPad OS? Like I said, I would love to have an iOS app work like that on a Mac desktop, right? Much like you can on a Windows desktop with Android apps, right? And again, I say it's been a better implementation of the idea. There's the weather app right there, I pulled up a couple apps just to be able to demonstrate it. So that was something that I would have wanted in iPad OS, something that Stage Manager may bring, but in a limited way, in an Apple way, right? And it may work well enough. All I'm saying is, if that's the kind of experience you've been wanting on a tablet, it exists right now. I pretty much run exclusively in Samsung DeX mode. DeX is it's a boon. I love Samsung DeX. They've been iterating slower than I'd want them to, but even with Android 12 in the default tablet experience that you can switch to if you want, if you just want to be full screen in an app, and I rarely ever want to be full screen on a tablet app, it has happened, of course, when you're watching videos or you're doing something that you need the full screen for. It's pretty much exclusively in Samsung DeX mode. They're going to hopefully continue with it, because if they stop developing it, I will be very angry. Like, it's that kind of experience that you don't necessarily realize exists because no one's told you about it. You're in a completely different ecosystem and you're wanting that. That's what you, if that's what you want, now you know where to get it. I'm telling you, been using it for a year, not year, 2 years, year and a half. I've lost track. Not perfect, but I'm telling you, it makes an Android tablet so usable, and it's an amazing iPad multitasking alternative if you're not happy with the way that iPad has handled multitasking to this point.